I was just reading an article by Tim Morton that came out today, and about halfway through it, I started reading it out loud, and I really like the way that his words come out. I mean, he makes really good word choices, and it's kind of pleasurable to read out loud. So I felt like it could be interesting to do video. I really like his voice, and when he puts his stuff on YouTube, I love to watch how he reads. So he's kind of inspirational in that way. Tim Morton is, I guess you could call him a theoretical environmentalist or a philosopher or something like that. And, no term ever describes a person fully, but I really like the work that he's been doing. He hasn't really come out with an article for a while, but I like his stuff. And Graham Harman, the object-oriented ontologist, and they both kind of work in a similar field. So this piece is called Malfunctioning. This is part one. He asks, what is the nature of mastery? The ecological polity to come depends on receiving and interpreting messages coming from the environment. In turn, this means having some kind of susceptibility to such messages, whether in terms of accurately attuned technological instruments or in terms of the more inward psychological acceptance of that susceptibility. Attending to directives, listening as a condition for speech, that is mastery. And this is where my favorite quotation from Miles Davis comes in handy. Actually, it is only attributed to Miles Davis, which is better in a sense. According to the phenomenological view I adopt here, phrases and concepts are agents in their own right that wriggle around in and outside one's head. Anyway, here is Miles Davis. You have to play a long time to sound like yourself. He is asserting here that ontologically, before it is notes and riffs and tunes, music is a kind of listening, and improvising is a kind of reading, not just spontaneously splurting whatever. Playing is a mode of attunement. Thinking ecological awareness entails thinking ecology, but the opening subject is a special mode of attunement that I believe is now occurring to everyone, even Pat Robertson. Because even Pat Robertson has to use sunscreen because he doesn't want to get skin cancer. I'm talking about environmentality. The itty part is the important part of the word. It means a quality, a certain environmentalness. Sliding up to the bigger sorts of question, what is an environment, and what is ecology, in this way is very instructive. Environmentality shows up in literary texts, just like race, class, and gender. It shows up in texts that are not explicitly about the environment. You might imagine that this kind of explicit content has to do with rocks, bunny rabbits, stones. You make a long list. You realize that some things are left out. So what about pollution, race, gender? Yes, let's put all that in. Still, environmentality is not just about these kinds of content, but also has to do with some notion of form. Not that there is a form/content distinction, or that I am a formalist, or that there is only form. There are many ways of misreading that. To provide an example of environmental form, consider Brenda Hillman's poem, Cascadia. It's a poem about geological time, and it's a poem about traveling around various seedy motels in Northern California. That extreme scale juxtaposition conveys the fact that the poem is thinking explicitly about what environmental form might be. Looking somewhat superficially at it, one can easily see that it is doing what perhaps Mallarmé started, employing the space of a poem as part of the poem. The page itself, or space, or listening, what we might call the environment of the poem, which is a profoundly physical environment, is included. So in italics, it says, prior to 130 million years ago, much of California lay beneath ocean waters. It was bordered on the east by the mainland of North America, and on the west by a landmass known as Cascadia. That's Robert Durenberger, Elements of California Geography. And now to the poem, which might be kind of difficult to read. It in gray on the left, there are the words Holiday Inn, Lompoc, Hydrangea, one of these teeth bedspreads, and then most natives. And that's it kind of looks like wavy on the page. And then the poem begins in black ink, in the search for the search, and then the next 10 lines or so are indented, and then it'll end with one line that's not indented. So I'll start that over. In search for the search. During the experiments with wheels, after the scripted caverns, when what had been attached was no longer attached, after choosing the type of building in which no one has died, we recall the land or condition whose shape was formal. Formality gave pleasure. A shadow's shadow dragged it back to the sea of eyes. Last line, a poem floats inside its margins. This alone has an interesting result. The page or the air or the pixels and electromagnetic waves are not just nothing, not just blank space. We notice their physicality. It's why in introduction to poetry classes I now like to call this aspect of a poem its physical architecture rather than spatiality. It's as if the poem is written on a rubber sheet. This does strange things to the words. It is quite useful in this regard to think about this through Roman Jacobson's closing statement. There are 6 parts of communication. The physical medium, as he says, in which the signs are transmitted is the contact. A schematic opening hypothesis is that environmentality has to do with folding the contact into the poem. The poem is a physical thing as well as a semiotic thing. Some kind of twist in the poem allows the semiotic thing to talk about the physical thing. Such twists result in confusion and ambiguity because without a bunch of prepackaged assumptions, it is impossible to figure out exactly where the physicality stops and the semiotic aspect starts. This gets expressed in ambiguities about what counts as the poem as such. So with Hillman, we have a poem that could be 1 poem or 2 poems with light gray text and black text. That is the whole question. When you include the physical environment, all kinds of uncertainty arise. Environmentality is a slight feeling of uncertainty, slight feelings of anxiety. Something is a little wrong. It is easy to think this something wrong through Heidegger's tool analysis. In the first section of Being and Time, Heidegger argues that normally the environment just functions. But you notice things that are strange. It's as if there has been a malfunction, as when you are trying to hang up a picture and you hit your thumb. When it's just functioning, the tool is zuhanden, handy, ready to hand. It's just happening. The tool here could be the cup, the air, the eyes, the lungs. Not necessarily something that you can buy in a hardware store. Somehow then, environmentality is becoming aware of something that is just functioning. Yet now we have global warming and pollution. We are aware of it because some kind of malfunction is taking place. This will suffice as a first definition. Yet even functioning is a kind of malfunctioning. Hammers are not just for hammering. Pianos are not just for playing, as John Cage's 433, a superb example of malfunctioning as environmental art makes clear. Ducks aren't just for swimming, unless you are the teleological Aristotle, who asserts that Greeks are for dominating other races, barbarians are for enslaving, and so on. The teleological view permeated natural historical language until Darwin exploded it. For this, Marx wrote him a fan letter. When you see marvelously adapted language, it is incorrect. Consider how the National Geographic show might marvel at the webbed feet of ducks, beautifully adapted to swimming through the water. This is strictly not correct. Have you ever seen a coot? Coots do not have webbed feet. They exist. So, Evolution doesn't care much about the importance of webbed feet for swimming through the water. Adaptation doesn't mean fitting into an environment in a way that's perfect. It means that your particular malfunction didn't kill you before you passed on your genome. This malfunction is otherwise known as a genetic mutation. Such mutations are really cheap versions of adaptation, lame in a quasi-precise sense that all organs are kinds of malfunctioning prosthesis. The famous phrase, survival of the fittest, was inserted because people were worried about the cheapness and lameness. But even that phrase doesn't mean the survival of the people having six-pack abs or the most perfectly fitted into the environment. What is this environment, anyway, to which life forms are supposedly fitted? The environment is mostly just other life forms. Chalk cliffs are made of shells. Oxygen is made of bacterial outgassing. In any case, life forms are made of non-life. A rigid distinction between life, such as bacteria, and non-life, such as iron ore, breaks down at a sufficiently high resolution. Actually, most available iron ore is bacterial in origin too. The whole environment is other entities, and many of them are also adapting. So, when you adapt to your environment, you are working with a moving target, or rather a series of moving targets that are also adapting to you. You can easily see how such a scenario is all about flubs, kludges, and other sorts of ungainly slapstick. When you stop the tape of evolution, you won't ever find a perfect picture. It is all deviation. Expressed in another way, this is why it is strictly impossible to draw a rigid line between speciation, variation, and monstrosity. Yesterday's great feature might be today's vestigial organ. The environment is a bunch of malfunctioning tools. The Greek for tool is organon, hence the concept of organs. This disconcerting cacophony of tools is ontologically subtended by something strange, because there is no telos. Hammers aren't exclusively for hammering. Apparent functioning is subtended by malfunctioning. There is no progress in evolution. At whatever temporal scale one looks, one won't find a level on which it all smooths out or makes perfect sense. Why? Kant establishes a transcendental gap between phenomenon and thing. For instance, there is a gap between counting and number as such. It is as if phenomena are fragile islands floating atop a gigantic ocean of reason. Heidegger goes quite far down into the cold, dark waters of reason opened up by Kant. He explores how human subjects give meaning and reality to things. Since I can't directly access the thing, I have to open it or break it or think it to find out what it is. It's like the fact that I have to open the refrigerator to find out whether the light is on. Heidegger, hence Lacan, hence Derrida, fills in this Kantian legacy. The human subject is, as George W. Bush would have said, the decider. It gets to decide by opening that refrigerator. In particular, German thinkers are for some reason much better than others, at least for a certain moment in Heidegger's career. Why restrict the fun of being a decider to humans alone? Why can't fridges be deciders about things in fridges? They chill them, for instance. Or photons can be deciders about photographic plates. Quanta jostle and deflect one another. That is what measurement actually is at that scale, and why not at higher scales? When I see the light in the refrigerator, photons in the light are also translating the receptor cells in my retina. Why not accept the idea that everything is a sort of decider, at least potentially? The only thing stopping this explosive thought is some kind of anthropocentric copyright control, which restricts being a decider to the gap between humans and everything else. This is how Kant and later on Heidegger control the explosion. The gap between what a thing is and how it appears or functions or relates, same thing, cannot be restricted to the interface between humans and everything else by the very Kantian and Humean logic that starts off this line of reasoning. Since you can't smuggle in untestable metaphysical assumptions anymore, Assumptions such as there is something different and special about being a human. The anthropocentric metaphysical baggage is at profound odds with the open-minded bravery of admitting that one can't know things in themselves, only phenomena. So what happens when you release the copyright control? Underneath the human-flavored kitchen sink drama of deciding